my connection with God then is...
You don't have a connection with God.
I'm aware of that.
Because not in the way you think you don't have a connection with God. You don't not have a connection with God because you exist and you just don't yet have a connection with God. No, that's not what I meant. The reason you don't have a connection with God is that there is no you. There is no separate being other than God's being, infinite being, either to have or not to have a relationship with God. In less radical or advanced traditions than this one, we do credit the individual with an existence of their own. We say, okay, all right, you deeply believe that you are a separate self, so let's make a concession to you. Let's pretend that you are a separate self. The very highest estate of that separate self would be a devotional relationship with the infinite, to place itself under the feet of the infinite. That's the highest estate of the individual. It places the individual in the right relationship to the universal. But it is still, and it's a beautiful state to be in. I'm not criticizing it. It's a beautiful state to be in. But the individual still exists as an individual, apart from God's being. And so here we have two beings, God's being and an individual being, let alone 8 billion individual beings. And if there are 8 billion individual beings, then God's being can no longer be infinite, because all those individual beings would displace a little bit of God's infiniteness, and therefore God would not be God. So really, at this level of understanding, we wouldn't say this to everybody, but at this level of understanding, to assert oneself as an individual self in relationship to God is to deny God. So here we're a little radical. We don't make many concessions to the belief in separation. We make a concession, okay, investigate. So rather than giving the separate self something to do, namely devote itself to God, we say that the only concession we really make to the separate self here is, okay, you think you're a separate self, investigate it. The last concession we make to the separate self. Oh, you think you're King Lear, don't start getting busy with your prayers and meditation. No, investigate who you really are. That's still a concession. Self-inquiry is still a concession to the separate self, but it's the most radical concession. It's the last concession. So sometimes we make that concession here, but more and more these days we don't even make that concession. We just do not credit the separate self with any kind of existence at all. We give it nothing to do, not even self-inquiry. We start with being and we stay there. And that is the highest form of prayer. Self-inquiry is the second highest form of prayer, investigating the nature of the self that believes it is separate from God. But the very highest form of prayer, where prayer ceases to be something that we as a separate self do, but is simply understood to be what we are, is just to abide as being, just to be only God's being, to be so empty of oneself that God has come into the place of oneself, that where you previously looked inside and felt, I am a separate self, you now look inside and feel only God's being. You look outside and you see only God's face.
A lot of the times it is just resting in being, but it's like being wanted to go up and out and everywhere was the felt sense of it. And it felt fast, it felt enormous, and it was just like you wanted to stay there. And it was the most pure sense of I am that I've ever, and then that sense fell away. And there was no objective qualities. When you can't use any of your sense perceptions and think or feel or anything, there is just some bare knowing, like you said, feeling like that you were awake when you were asleep. And then it's like the I am sense came back online. Like you said, you really can't remember or give any qualitative or quantitative anything about that. But when it came online, it was just oceanic. It made this room, when I opened my eyes, look like the closet in my bedroom. I mean, it was just everywhere. Then it kind of got a little less subtle, and there was no discrimination. If you were talking, or if I was breathing, or if a chair was moving, it all just was the same stuff, like a little popcorn kernel that just coming up in that big old area. And as it settled down again, sound, you talking, I'm sitting, chair moving. It's like things went from extremely subtle to extremely gross to, okay, my left foot, is asleep, kind of a feeling. So I don't know. That's something that I had never run some kind of gamut like that, and I just wanted your feedback on. I guess I'm most interested in that gap because it was a clear, the most crisp sense of being gone, back.
Yeah. So then you described first that being felt vast, and that's in contrast with the previous and normal feeling that being is tiny, constricted, located inside the body. Mm-hmm. So when being is relieved of that limitation, we first might feel that it's vast, but being is not vast. It doesn't have any dimensions. So vast is just the mind's way of representing the fact that it's no longer contained in the body. So you went from the feeling of being tiny, contained, restricted, to it being vast, but then you lost also the sense of being vastness. So it's as your thoughts and perceptions thinned, being was relieved of a limitation, but thought and perception was still there, so you perceived it and conceived it as being vast. But then as thought and perception thinned out even more, you lost all sense of time and space, and the world and objects, and you were there for, you can't say how long because there was no time there. But then thought and perception begin to come back again, but to begin with just very subtly. Mm-hmm. So again, being then feels oceanic, vast. The shades of the prison house begin to descend on the growing boy. The prison house of thoughts and perceptions are beginning to, the shades, the shadow of thought and perception is beginning to impose itself on being. First it was infinite, which means no dimensions at all. Then as thought and perception begins, you feel it's vast. And then as thought and perception comes online more and more, mm-hmm. it gets smaller and smaller and smaller as well.
That's exactly how it felt.
And as it gets smaller, objects, when you were in pure being, there were no objects at all. But then objects begin to emerge. But they're not. It's as you say. It's a chair. It's a sensation. You can't separate out objects. Mm-hmm. Thought and objects haven't been separate. But there's still some kind of objective experience.
It's the same texture.
It's all the same texture. But as the shades of the prison house begin to descend, then the objects begin to separate out. Mm-hmm. The noise, which was it then becomes a chair moving. This vague, nebulous sensation then becomes my left foot. So then objects begin to become, separate objects become more and more distinct, and you find yourself back in the body. Mm-hmm. Being seems to be limited. A chair is a chair, a person is a person. So it's this dissolving of thought and perception. To begin with, you seem to get larger and larger, you expand. And then even the sense of expansion disappears because being has no dimensions. And then thought and perception come back, but only slowly to begin with. So objective experience, there are not clear, distinct names and forms, but then names and forms. Wordsworth describes it much better than I do. He I don't know if I can remember it. Our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting. The soul, our life's star that rises with us, hath had elsewhere its setting and cometh from afar. But not in entire forgetfulness, nor in utter nakedness do we come from God, which is our home. But not in entire forgetfulness, nor in utter nakedness, but trailing clouds of glory do we come from God, which is our home. And then he describes that shades of the prison house begin to close upon the growing boy. But he beholds the light, and whence it came, he sees it in his joy. The youth, who farther daily from the east must travel, still is nature's priest. At length, the man perceives it die away and fade into the light of common day. The youth who farther daily from the east must travel still is nature's priest. The man perceives it, at length, perceives it die away and fade into the light of common day. So again, this is Wordsworth describing how being is infinite, but shades of the prison house begin to close upon the growing boy. But he still beholds the light. He's only 5 years old, so his thought and perception haven't completely objectified his experience. He still perceives the light. Wordsworth said, shades of the prison house begin to close upon the growing boy. He still perceives the light. He sees it in his joy. But then, as he grows older, the youth who farther daily from the east must travel still is nature's priest. It still is in touch with nature's eternity.
And what's interesting is walking today and everything, there's so many youth memories, and it just felt like I could be 7.
Yes, exactly, because you've regressed, so to speak. You've gone back to that, to the state of the boy whose being is beginning to be enclosed in thought and perception, but still the light is filtering through that. He sees it in his joy. He still beholds the light. He sees it in his joy. So although the materiality of the world, the objectiveness of the world is present, it's still transparent to the light of being. So you feel you're a 7-year-old boy and everything is glowing with radiance. And then as thought and perception begins to solidify, so names and forms, we get names from thought, we get forms from perception. Names and forms begin to become more concrete. Infinite being seems to become 10,000 things, and the light begins to diminish. We begin to see the world as a material world. At length the man perceives it die away and fade into the light of common day. The man, he loses, in our adult life, we lose touch with this vision of the world as the shining of being. And it fades into the light of common day, where objects are objects and people are people and things are things. And we lose touch with the sacred. The sacred no longer shines in and as the world. So during the meditation, you had this experience of reversing this process, going back to being. And then when you were walking, the memory, it wasn't the memory from the past, but the memory from inside you, your present memory, enabled you to see the world transparent to its reality still. So you felt that the world was glowing with a kind of inner light, not with a physical light, but with the light of being. That's beautiful.
So there's a new term that or a new phrase that you've been using in the last couple of retreats. It's like falling asleep while remaining awake. But and I've said that I consider you the Michael Jordan of non-dual terminology. So I say this with respect, that the word sleep is so loaded, even like in the Bible. And I know what you're saying. What you're saying is really what Gurdjieff was saying when self-remembering with attention. Like, you're not saying you're falling asleep while remaining awake, but if I threw a ball at you, you would just let it hit you.
No.
In actuality, you'd be better at seeing the ball, because it's like a heightened, it's an unencumbered state of vigil, a waking state. It's the opposite of what we normally term sleep.
But it's not really the purpose of the phrase. Well, what happens when we fall deeply asleep? First of all, our sensations and perceptions leave us, and we're in the dreaming state. Then our images and thoughts leave us, then we're in deep sleep. What is deep sleep? It's just the awareness of being, pure aware being, but aware of nothing. That's deep sleep. So the suggestion, fall asleep whilst remaining deeply awake, it simply means remain as being in the presence of thoughts and images and sensations and perceptions. Remain as being. And when there were no thoughts and images and no sensations and perceptions, we called pure being deep sleep. So now we're just saying remain deeply asleep. But in other words, remain as pure being, but this time in the presence of thoughts and images and sensations and perceptions. So it's a poetic and hopefully evocative, because we all know what it feels like to be deeply asleep. So it's not just poetic; it's evocative. We're trying to. Not only do we all know what it's like to be deeply asleep, but we all love to be deeply asleep. We all look forward at the end of the day to being deeply asleep. Why? Because it's peaceful there. So it's not just poetic, it's evocative. It's rather than describe a state of pure consciousness, which may seem abstract to us. Deep sleep is not abstract. Everybody knows what I mean by deep sleep. Not everybody knows what I mean by pure consciousness. You do here, but most people don't know. But if we were to talk about deep sleep to 8 billion people, they'd all know the experience. So it's the teaching trying to not just describe our true nature, but to evoke the recognition of it in us.
I think what you're pointing to in the way you described it is it's perfect. And ideally, right now, ideally, you and I are like right now. I'm dropping into. I'm aware. I'm not caught up in the experience. I'm aware of the sensations in my body. I am not them, but I'm doing my best to drop into being asleep while being awake, and I assume that you are as well. Yeah. So in other words, and when I'm in this state, if somebody throws an idea at me or a ball at me, I'm actually way better at responding. In other words, the attention is not. The attention is not disabled. Like it can still go out.
Yes, absolutely, yes, very much so. And as you say, in many cases, it may even be better able to go out and deal with the ball or whatever it is, because it is not completely immersed in the drama of experience, in your feelings, in your. So yes.
And really quickly, like when I hear the best athletes, when they don't. Not many I know of that know of non-duality, but when they speak of how, somebody asks them, how did you do that in that tense moment? Like you were so awake, it was so quick. And he said it was, they say very often that it was as if time had slowed down and it was more relaxed than normal. So like in a way it's the same thing, like they were able to fall asleep while being awake, and that enabled them to move more quickly. Anyway.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Hi, Rupert. Hi. My question has to do with mind. We had a lot of discussion about being asleep and what that means. So if you ask me the question right now, am I aware? I would say yes, because I can go to that experience and tell you what it feels like, what it is to be aware. And I can tell you the qualities of my being. But if you were to ask me the same question, if I was deeply asleep, in a dreamless sleep, I don't know if I could answer that question. So my question is, does mind need to be present in order for us to be aware of our being?
No. Your mind needs to be present in order to hear the question, are you aware? Your mind needs to be present to answer the question, am I aware? But in between those two instances of mind, hearing the question, are you aware? answering the question yes. In between those two instances, there is no mind. There's just consciousness. So the question, the question, are you aware? It's a powerful question. With that question, the mind brings itself to an end. And in the ending of the mind, consciousness shines. As a result of that shining, well, consciousness is always shining, but it's no longer obscured by the mind. As a result of that shining of consciousness, the mind then rises again, and it answers yes to the question. That yes, that the mind speaks on behalf of consciousness. Yes, I am present and I know myself.